So hi everyone, we're finally getting around to part 2 of Inside the Music, which right now is looking at my preparations for live performances this year, starting with the Rogue Festival in just a couple of weeks. And in the last video, which was several weeks ago, we took a look at some improvements that I was trying to make in terms of simplifying the setup and expediting how all of this gear gets put together before it's rolled on stage. So we've got several really important things done. First of all, the platform is now on much better casters, a little bit taller so that the two sections of the platform can go over thresholds nicely when we're going through a door to get to the performance location. For the Rogue Festival, I'm going to be performing in the back room of a bookstore. So I have to be able to kind of mostly put this together, roll it out into the performance area, and within just a few minutes have everything connected up and running and ready for the performance. So the basic setup is what I had last year, but with some really important improvements. I have my C200 keyboard, which is an organ emulator on its own, and I have my Studio Logic MIDI controller. I have my Studio Logic bass pedal board down here, and I'm using the RC600 multi-track looper. This unit is not only the multi-track looping system I use for setting up those layered rhythmic effects that my music is reliant on, but it is also the audio interface for the computer, which is running now the newest version of Hopwerk, which is kind of the premium pipe organ simulator software. I don't know if you can exactly see it, but there's a graphic of kind of an organ console up there, and it's samples of that actual organ. I have on the rack simplified the mixing arrangement. I have two mixes, one for the house and one for me, which includes the occasional click track generated by the RC600 when I need to really precisely link things up. I've added a third effects processor because I can route the signaling of the organ sounds a little more now than I was with the earlier version of Hopwerk. I now have a signal processor which is just for the pedal stops, the bass notes. It's better most of the time not to have the delay effect on the pedal board and to leave the delay effect in the manuals. I have my two trusty TC Electronics multi-effects processors. The upper one is handling the sounds that I'm using off the C200, as well as the Hopwerk sounds that are triggered by the C200. All the sounds from Hopwerk can be additionally triggered from the Studio Logic keyboard, and the sounds that are normally triggered from the Studio Logic keyboard are put through the second processor. So overall got a nice cleaner sound. And I'll drop a still shot in here to show you this arrangement over here, which is the connections between the rack and the keyboard setup. So last year I had just a bundle of patch cords that were all labeled with masking tape, and I had to plug them directly into the various items on the rack, and that was kind of time consuming, and I wanted to have a snake. In the last video I was talking about maybe having a double-ended snake, one attached to the keyboards, one attached to the rack, and then they would go together with these old style pin connectors. That didn't really work out, so what I have is the snake has standard phone plugs on both ends. It's attached to the rack, and then it rolls out and attaches to the RC600. In addition to that, I have a single USB connection between the computer and everything up here that requires a USB connection, which is the Studio Logic keyboard and the RC600 for the audio interface on the computer. And then I have two MIDI cables that go into a MIDI merge box that run the effects processors and allow those to change their setting at will. Now, at this point, this is it. This is what I'm going to be using for live performances this year. I don't know that I'm going to do much of anything else to the rig. I'm going to at least get through the Rogue Festival, and then there's some other performances that are coming up right after that that I'll be sharing information about when those are a little closer. The big improvement that I really wanted to make was in the speaker system. Now, last year I used these big cabinet speakers that I normally have in my living room. Here's a still shot for you. They're a little cumbersome to lug around. They are very effective. They're high-powered and good sounding speakers. But like I say, they're a little heavy to lug around. Now, the thing that I really wanted to do was to create a custom 2.1 speaker system, which is two compact full-range speakers supplemented by a single subwoofer. And I bought a subwoofer cabinet, and I got a hold of some Walker technical company speakers that are designed specifically for organ. And unfortunately, that's where the whole thing kind of fell apart. The Walker speakers I got for free from the company I work for. We had them as extra stock. It turns out, though, that they're the older style speaker that's designed specifically for Rogers analog organs from the 1980s. Well, what difference does that make? Well, in the old days, before digital sampling and digital sound production, electronic organs were generated through analog synthesis. And to get an analog synthesizer to really sound like an organ, you had to do some trickery with the kinds of speakers that it played through. And so typically an analog organ speaker system has a sharp roll-off. I think it's around 6,000 or 7,000 cycles. So we're going along nice and flat, and then we get up into those higher frequencies, and the proportions of those higher frequencies rolls off, meaning that starting around 6,000 or 7,000 cycles, it gets less and less and less and less and less. And what that was for was to cut out the extremely high harmonics that are generated by analog oscillators so that it would sound more organ-like. Well, with digital sampling, it's the opposite issue. We want a high fidelity speaker. We want it to be flat from top to bottom, as wide as it can be. And the thing about those Walker speakers is that, well, they look identical. You can't tell them apart until you open them up. And then you realize, oh, this is configured for being an analog organ speaker system. I just don't have time to mess with that right now. There's a couple of different ways I can approach just modifying those speakers so that they'll be hi-fi speakers. And I have enough parts laying around to do that. But that's just going to have to be a project for another day. I might get that done after Rogue Festival, and then in time for the other performances coming up in April and possibly May. So this has been a fun little project, because what I've really done here is just made some improvements over what I had before. Looking down the road, the C200 here doesn't really work well as a MIDI controller, because it's intended to be a standalone keyboard that you might use to accompany a choir in a small church somewhere. It works beautifully as designed, but when I set it all up to be a MIDI controller, then there's some quirky things that it does that are really not very productive. It would be better for me to have a second MIDI controller, but that's going to have to wait. And for now, we're just going to use it as is. The ultimate thing that I want to do, as far as using the Hopworks software to generate my pipe organ sounds, is I can create in that software a custom organ in which I drop samples in to specifically for the music that I'm doing. And I have been thinking about the fact that that would involve a slightly different arrangement from what's normal in a pipe organ. And but we're going to explore that again after the Rogue Festival. I'm going to dig into that custom organ module in the software and see just what I can and can't do with that. But what would really be slick would be to have the sounds all lined up in groups the way I need them to be and the way I need them to route out into the various effects processors, and just, and then have just those perfect sounds just for my music configured on that instrument. So that's a possibility for the future as well. So I will post the times and dates and locations for the Rogue Festival performances in the video description, as well as my updated website and other good links that you can go to and check out what I'm up to. If you happen to be in the Fresno area or don't mind making a little trip, come and see me. Anyway, that's it for today. Thanks a lot. We'll see you next time.